about the city, looking at the city from the lens of police chief since then?
Well, great. That's an easy question. Yeah. So, really, I've been the deputy chief for 3.5 years, working alongside Chief O'Toole here in the city. So I knew a lot about what the expectations were of the chief and some of the work that was involved in being the police chief. But you often hear that it's different, being at the top on your own, but it actually is. Like, even though I was very close, really I felt like almost attached to the hip in many ways. Yeah. Now the buck stops with you. Decisions are made, discipline, lawsuits, deployments, all of the things that come with being police chief. No day is ever the same. And now it really is on your shoulders to make sure that you're being thoughtful and appropriate, building the right team. I know Amazon is a team-oriented environment, lots of teams. Building the right team to make sure that those decisions are being made effectively, efficiently, with the best interest of the community and the officers involved. Yeah. So the difference was mostly is that now I really, not that I wasn't engaged and involved before, but now I'm really taking that to heart in a way that's much more deeper, because this is it, right? At the end of the day, the buck stops with you. So whatever happens, good, bad, or otherwise, no one's writing about anybody else on my team. You'll rarely see their name in the paper, but you see Chief Carmen Best. So it really does land on me to make sure that those decisions are thoughtful, are proactive, and are made in the best interest of the city.
So how is the city doing these days in terms of crime and public safety? What should Amazonians be mindful of as we walk to work, as we walk to lunch, and walk across the campus?
Well, everyone will tell you that, all of those issues around crime and, being victimized are very individual. So I go to neighborhoods and I'll tell you, crime is down in the city overall. The numbers are down, and the data shows that. But if you're the victim of the crime, that doesn't really resonate as well. You know what I mean?
Right.
So we think there's a whole host of things to do along those lines. One is personal protection, personal safety, making sure that you're aware of your surroundings, that you walk in pairs, that you're not making yourself an obvious target by looking down at your phone, walking around. Things that I see people do all the time. I do too, but I have a security detail. Yeah, so should that happen, it's like I want to squarely blame him. But so just making sure you're aware of your own personal safety, but also your facilities and security. You guys are very fortunate here that you have a wonderful team that works really hard to make sure that the employees here have a safe environment. They badge in, they badge out, they have all sorts of mechanisms in place to make sure your employees are safe while on the campus. And we want to make sure that you're safe while you're walking the streets of Seattle. And I think relatively speaking, it is a very safe city when you compare Seattle to other major cities. But we also have our challenges. We have to recognize that too. There's challenges with mental health issues, particularly in this area, people who are in crisis. Last year, we responded to 15,995 crisis calls, people who really needed additional services. Sometimes that involves some crime, but mostly it's their behavioral issues that were a problem. We also are dealing with methamphetamine and an opioid. The Surgeon General said that this country has a state of emergency for opioid use. So that's not just in Seattle, that's across the nation, a state of emergency. And also in Seattle, we have a methamphetamine use issue as well. So we're, on officers, while they may not be the most well-equipped at all times, they are on the front lines of this stuff every single day. Homelessness, crisis, addiction, domestic violence, pedophiles, rapists, robbery, you name it, it's the police department that's responding first to those types of calls for service. So we're really working hard to make sure that we have people, not only our policies and our procedures are the most, progressive, but that our people are properly trained on everything that we do. We do 5 times more training now than we've ever done before. We make sure that we partner with other organizations, including our fire department, to make sure that we have good responses, because we know we have to be efficient and effective, especially with limited resources. So that's really important. And all those things, we're always continuously trying to improve and innovate in the police department and make sure that we're on the cutting edge and leading the way in some of these really pervasive issues.
You talked about partnerships, and for those of you in the room that don't know, there is a Seattle Police Foundation, and Amazon is on that board. Someone from Amazon Corporate Security, he's not here today, he's in a mandatory meeting somewhere else, but he's on the board. So talking about partnerships, sure. Amazon Corporate Security also worked with the Seattle Police Department with Deputy Chief Mark Garth Green to put
Right.
together the Greater Seattle Security Council. And it's basically a convening of the security executives from all of the top companies in the greater Seattle area with the executives from law enforcement to
Sure.
come together, to collaborate, to talk about best practices. How do we together keep Seattle safe? So in talking about partnerships, can you talk a little bit about what partnerships with the business community and the corporate community
Sure.
looks like for your
Well, you
department?
know, one of the old sayings in the department since I came on was information to be useful must be shared. So one of the things we want to do is we want to make sure that any information that we have, whether it's an MO or trends or what we're seeing, that we're sharing that information with all of our partners. And I often say everything is about relationships. The first time we have these conversations can't be when there's a crisis. We have to be prepared, be talking about what happens, how the relationships build, and sharing information so that we have greater capacity to respond to any problems that that are occurring out there. And those things change, like everything else. You know,
Yes.
it's ebb and flow. You
Uh-huh.
know, and if there's some sort of threat that comes up, we may have to have a different response, today than we did before, depending on what's heightened in the country, in the city, wherever we're talking here. So I think it's really important. The Greater Seattle group, this meeting, it's a great way for us to exchange information, for us to stay on the forefront of what's innovative, technology, and those types of developments as they occur. So I think it's really important to have those partnerships, and I really am grateful to Amazon or other partners for coming forward and participating.
Partnerships with the business community, yes, and you're here to connect with us here, but also partnerships across the line with the fire
Sure.
department.
Sure.
We all know what the police department does, the fire department does, but I think, Chief, there are a lot of things that the fire department is responsible for in terms of scope of services that the general public and we may not be aware of. Could you give us an overview of the non-fire related
Non-fire.
things? Because I think about 85% of the calls for service and not fire related. Right?
Sure, I'll give you an overview, but first, thank you to Amazon for hosting Chief Bess and I. Excited to be here, and I'm always proud and excited to talk about the work that we do. And we do so many different things, not just here in Seattle, but all around the country. I mean, we just launched out one of our battalion chiefs yesterday to Puerto Rico for the hurricane that may be coming in. And that's one of the things that a lot of people don't really know what we do. We send people down to California for the wildfires. Last summer we sent them to Hawaii, as well as on the East Coast, down to Oregon and all of our neighboring states. For whatever incident that may be happening around the country, you may want to start to think, boy, I wonder, do we have anyone from Seattle there? Our Washington State Task Force, they were down in Florida, they were down in Houston. And those are a number of things outside of the state that we do on a regular basis. But most of what we do here locally is EMS. EMS is a big driver. We talk about community growth all the time. The city has grown by about 130,000 people in the last 10 years, and that's pretty significant. But what that's done for our call load, it's raised it by about 20,000 calls for service, but we haven't really grown in our staffing. So that becomes a big part of the challenge. We have technical teams around the city, some of the most amazing teams that you want to work with, from our hazmat team. Some of you may remember a couple of years ago, I'm trying to think of the Sentinel event you may remember, but Interstate 5 was shut down right at I-90 when the tanker overturned. Well, that was our hazmat team working that event, solving that problem. It was 8 hours, but if something had gone wrong and we lost I-90 Interstate 5 intersection, it would have been a lot longer than 8 hours. As you look at all the building that's taking place around the city, every now and again we have a construction accident. And what our technical rescue team will do is they will come, they will bring their rope systems, rappel down, get the person, bring them down to the bottom. They do that quite often. We have our divers and we have our fire boats. Last weekend we had a very nice reception over in Mount Baker. We had a Seattle Fire Day and the community really came out. We had our rescue swimmers in the water, we had our fire boats there, we had our technical rescue team there. So we do so many things that the community really doesn't see. But we got really 3 things we focus on. We focus on solving problems, mitigating emergencies, making sure that when the problem happens, we can solve it, no matter what it is. The second thing is we prevent those things from happening through fire prevention. So the people who live, work, and visit and play here, we want to make sure they have a safe environment that when they're anywhere around Seattle, they don't even have to think about it. And we try to educate, and that's another big one. If the bad thing does happen, we want the community educated so they know what to do, so when we get there, we can help solve the problem in a timely manner and not have to worry about serving them because they've already taken care of themselves. So that's a little bit about what we do.
Yeah. So Chief, there's a lot that you do, and you've been here 4 years as Chief. What would you say were some of the things that, the challenges you worked through during the last 4 years?
Well, there's been many. In a growing city, you can see the landscape changing right in front of us. And you know, we focus on the built environment, and we love new buildings coming up. So thank you, Amazon. You've been a big part of that because you get the latest and greatest technology in fire and life safety. But it really doesn't change what's in the building. You know, all the synthetics and everything burns a little faster, and the emergencies still happen. So trying to make sure we have the resources that we need. That's been one of the big ones. Serving the population on the street. You talked about the opioid crisis. That's one of the things that we pay attention to every week. Every week I get a report, and we are going on probably 15 to 25 opioid overdoses in Seattle every week. That's every single week. The homeless crisis is a big one that's right in front of us. We're responding to about 225 homeless calls every single week. And that comes from the person in the tent that needs medical care or to the tent fire and everything in between. Those are some of the real challenges that are right in front of us. And the violence on the street. The violence is a big deal in front of us. And that's one of the things we're trying to retrain our firefighters to have a different mindset on safety. We've partnered with Seattle Police Department on our rescue task force model. We've watched some of the tragedies that happened around the country. And last year, I'm proud to say, Seattle Police Department and Seattle Fire Department, we trained together down at their gun range. So if those events did happen, we have an excellent partnership, but making sure we're equipped and outfitted right to go in and save people when they really need saving is a big deal. We've seen it around the country when it's gone well, and we've seen it when it hasn't gone well. We've had some of those professionals from those places come in and talk to us and educate us. So if those events did happen here, we feel like we're better prepared. We're never really all the way there until you're in the moment. You do the best you can, but you can prepare along the way, and Sets and Reps gives you that.
Okay. So a question for both of you, with the homelessness issue that we're all very aware of, a lot of America's cities, major cities are dealing with this issue, and it's big here. What are your individual department's policies, and how does your department address the homelessness issue?
Well, that's a really broad question, because homelessness is it's a vast issue. It's multifaceted, very complex. You know, there are people who are homeless because, they're down on their luck, they don't have employment. There's some folks who say it's, the housing crisis, others who have addiction issues, others have mental health issues, others who have a combination of all those, others who are out there preying on those who have those issues. So there's no run response to, a very complex issue like that. So one of the things we do, and I'm sure Chief Scoggins will, talk about that as well, is we partner with other agencies, and each of us working with other agencies, whether they're private entities or public, to make sure that we all have, a role to play, in particular whatever the issue is. Just having a multidisciplinary response. The city, through the Human Services Division, has a navigation team. We've assigned 12 people to be on that team to participate, but there are human services providers, outreach workers, all engaged and involved. And part of what they do is they reach out to people who are living unsheltered in the city, make sure that they have the ability to provide the option for resources and other sort of wraparound services to those folks. The demand is great, and many of the folks, decline participation the first time. So it may take, 7 or 8, touches, if you will, before people actually engage. But we know that, we're gonna have to continue to work with them. And we also know that we're not gonna be able to arrest our way out of these issues. It is not a crime to be homeless, and so just being homeless in and of itself doesn't automatically elicit some sort of police response, but there are other pieces to it that will cause us to engage with people. But I really and truly feel like this is a multidisciplinary issue. It's gonna take a lot of folks on a lot of different levels working to help deal with some of these pervasive issues. And it's not a Seattle, as you mentioned, only issue. Right. If you go to San Diego, Los Angeles, Portland, San Jose, all these cities are dealing with some aspect of this as well. So it's really gonna take us all working together, exchanging, as we talked about information exchange, ideas and thoughts about how to respond collaboratively to sort of address these much broader issues.
Like you said, it's a multidisciplinary approach to addressing the issue.
Mhm.
But I think there are a lot of people who wonder, well, what's the city's role versus what's the police department's role? What's the fire department's role? And in different cities, different police departments have different policies as to what they can do, how they enforce, what they do to not enforce, et cetera. Could you educate us as to what the Seattle Police Department's kind of specific
When you say
role
enforce, what do you mean?
So there are, in other cities,
Mhm.
they'll say certain police departments are, that there are policies set, let's say, by a city council or the elected officials that will say, we don't remove certain property off, or we don't remove the encampments. Or in some cities, they will remove the encampments. Are there, I'll ask it this way, what are some of the challenges for your department? Because it's not the police department's problem,
Yeah, so that's one of the
right?
big challenges,
Yes,
just educating
it's not.
people on whose role is what.
Right,
You know, so,
exactly.
you know, I mean, nobody swore I know to my cops, said, like, your job is to go out there and, you know, remove encampments. And we don't do that now, actually. We do participate with a team of human services providers, who that's their role, to do that outreach and engagement, to involve people with services, to give them the counseling and referral that they need, a law enforcement assisted diversion, where we divert people into other sort of resources. So, yeah, so the, you know, enforcing, that's why I always say we can't, you know, arrest our way out of homelessness. We're not enforcing anything on people because they're unsheltered, right? But
Right.
it's the other aspects of that. We enforce people when they commit crimes. And last year we arrested 10,212 people for criminal activity. So there's not a shortage or a lack of arrests being made. But, you know, we need to be very clear about whose role is what.
Yes, it's good for us to know that. And Chief Scoggins, what is the fire department's role in?
Well, number one, when I talk to our people about this particular topic, I ask them to live our values. One of our values is compassion. You know, it takes a lot for a person someone living in a tent at 2 o'clock in the morning, then going there at 4 o'clock in the morning, again at 6 o'clock to provide the service. And that's number one, is be compassionate. Think about, you know, this person needs some help. It's their worst day at this point in time, so serve them well. But we do a lot with partnering with the police department and all the nonprofits to really try to figure a path out. We are working in an old, antiquated system. And what I mean is, you call 911, we pick up a person, and we take them to the emergency room. And it may not be a life-threatening emergency, so the emergency room releases them.
Sure.
And then they're back on the street, and the wheel continues to turn over and over. As we watch the changes in healthcare take place, the fire department has slowly become a part of America's healthcare system. People will call us for everything, and that's okay, except we haven't made a course correction. You know, as we did 49 years ago, next year, March 7th, will be the Medic One 50-year anniversary, where paramedicine was actually born here in Seattle, and we'll be celebrating that. But that was a big change for the fire service, because we then ventured into EMS in a big way. Right now, we're making another significant shift. In the fourth quarter in October, we're going to be launching a new resource, and this resource is called Health One. And it's going to be a whole different perspective. We're going to have 2 firefighters with a caseworker on a vehicle, meeting people where they sit, not to take them to the emergency room, but to find out what they need. If you need connections with crisis counselors, we want to get you there. If you need a medical appointment, we want to get you there. If you need to go to the shelter, we want to get you there. The purpose of this vehicle is not to take them to the emergency room, but to spend a significant amount of time to slow the wheel down. Because what we saw is, we brought a caseworker, a social worker in the department about 3 years ago. And what she was doing is, after the incident, follow up on our high utilizing 911 callers. And what we saw is, when she had a touch with the person over time, we saw a 3-call reduction per person per quarter for our high utilizers. So what that means is, some of our high utilizers were calling 911 50 times a year.
Wow.
I mean, just over and over and over. she's now taking these people out of the system because they weren't life-threatening emergencies, so they need help, they need guidance. And so our role is shifting once again, as it did 49 years ago, is we're shifting maybe a little bit into social services. But the community trusts the fire department. They let us in their homes at 2 o'clock in the morning in their most vulnerable state, and they're willing to tell us anything because they believe we're going to help them. So we need to capitalize on that trust and really try to expand our services to get people what they need where they are. They don't have to come meet us. We'll go meet them. So we're gonna launch a pilot, and with the support of the mayor and the council, we're gonna start off with one vehicle, and we're gonna be studying it. And we've flown around the nation. We've looked at everything else everyone is doing. Matter of fact, our low acuity program manager was in DC yesterday talking to Washington DC about some of the things that they're doing. So we're seeking out best practices from all around the country, and we're going to try to deploy them here to really serve this community better.
Yeah, we're doing the same. We actually we have a mental health provider that's on our staff full time, but we're adding 4 in the next budget. Same thing.
Wow.
This is how, the landscape, as you mentioned, is changing, so that, the police service, the fire service now have to really look at how we're gonna engage in some of these other issues that aren't traditional issues for us.
Right. So with the homelessness issue, very inextricably tied is the opioid crisis and drugs and addiction. You mentioned mental health as well. Who saw the documentary Seattle is Dying? Can we see a show of hands so we know who knows? Okay. So for those of you who haven't seen it, it depicts the homeless kind of issue in Seattle, and it ties it to, of course, and brings to light the addiction problems that are rampant on the streets. And so, but that documentary has received a lot of different kinds of reactions in the community, and so we wanted to hear from you, just straight directly from you, because it talks about the police department's response, fire department's response. What are your thoughts on that documentary?
Well, one of the things that came out, there was, many aspects were the topic of discussion. One of them was like repeat calls for service and repeat offenders. And, we didn't need a documentary to let us know that we have repeat offenders, because we're the ones that are dealing with some of these folks routinely. And from our own information, we know that about 1,000 people at least that we respond to at least 4 times a year. So we know that. So we're really looking at ways that we can reduce those repeat folks that we're coming across, repeat offenders, repeat calls for service. Chief Scoggins will tell you some folks, like he said, 50 times a year, some more than that they call for a whole host of different reasons. So, and then we're working with, both the city attorney and the prosecutor's office and diversion programs to see what else we can do so that we're not dealing with the same people over and over again, particularly those who are in mental health crisis. So they're incompetent to stand trial. About 21% of the folks that we arrest, aren't competent to go through the court system and definitively, represent themselves or be represented. So then they end up back in the street, or on the front lines there. So we really want to try to find interventions that will help us get better services for those folks.